What's going on, family? Just want to let you know I appreciate all of you. I've noticed that the likes are going up, the views are going up. I've been getting a lot more subscribers. I couldn't do any of this without y'all, so I thank you very much. I put a lot of work and effort into these videos, and I do a lot of research here, so thanks again. I appreciate all of you. I love all of you. So go ahead and hit the like button, subscribe, share. I want y'all to get this one out there a lot because it's packed with a lot of information, so let's get into it.
You know, it's funny how humanity's hate for each other is stronger than its own self-preservation, which is why we're here.
Ladies and gentlemen of the internet, this is your wake-up call. Let's talk a bit about CRT. Most of you know it as critical race theory, but what is critical race theory? Critical race theory is an academic concept over 40 years old. The core idea is that race is a social construct and that racism is not merely the product of individual bias or prejudice, but also something embedded in legal systems and policies. Those who are intelligent and have at least read a little bit about U.S. history can see that this is true. After this message, I will show you just how deep the rabbit hole goes. I want to talk a little bit about a new affiliate, Negast Footwear. They are a Black-owned company that makes some of the best quality shoes, clothes, and hats that I've seen in a very long time. They are designed to empower customers and to teach self-love, self-respect, and self-confidence. I've purchased some of their footwear, and they have lasted me well over a year. Negast Footwear makes sneakers, running shoes, slippers, boots, hats, and clothing. I love my slippers. I love my sneakers. Even game show contestants love my sneakers. Click my affiliate link below to visit their site to browse and to shop. Every purchase helps me grow this platform. So let us begin. There is only one truth about why your politicians and racists are fighting to block all CRT education. They tell you that CRT means teaching their children racism, or those who Ted Cruz brainwashes thinks CRT says that all white people are racist.
We are seeing an assault on our nation, an assault at a level never before in the history of this country. All of the foundations of this country are under assault. The Constitution is under assault. The Bill of Rights is under assault. Our founding fathers are under assault. The eternal principles America was built on are being attacked each and every day. This assault is relentless. And the left is like the Terminator. They control the airwaves. They control media. They control journalism. They control education. They control Hollywood. They control culture. And they try to tell us nobody else thinks like you do. Just go back home, retreat, hide, give up on America. We are ascendant. What they're doing is wrong, and it's built on a pile of lies. You know, Andrew Breitbart once said, politics is downstream from culture. But you know, my father has a ministry where he preaches to pastors all across the country, and he's got at times a hard message where he says, you look at 62 million unborn children who've lost their lives. You look at our values being stripped away, and the message my father preaches is no one bears more responsibility for that than the pastors in America. And let me tell you right now, if we are going to defeat the woke assault, then all of us need to wake up. The patriots across America who love our nation, who reject the stinking pile of lies that the left is selling. We need to wake up. We need to energize. We need to engage. And let me tell you, we can win and we will win. South Lake School Board had implemented a curriculum where they were teaching critical race theory. Now, what is critical race theory? You know, just this week on Capitol Hill, I had a reporter run up to me. He thought he had a gotcha. He said, hey, what's critical race theory? Apparently, he thought I would turn to him and say, gosh, I have no idea. I think it's really bad, but I just don't know what it is, because, conservatives are morons and we don't know what we're talking about. Well, it's a theory that derives from Marxism. Karl Marx viewed the entire world as a conflict between classes, between the owners of capital and the working man and women, the proletariat, a fundamental battle in society. Critical race theory takes that same Marxist concept, except it replaces class with race. And it says all of America and all of the world is a battle between the races. Critical race theory says every white person is a racist. Critical race theory says America is fundamentally racist and irredeemably racist. Critical race theory seeks to turn us against each other, and if someone has a different color skin, seeks to make us hate that person. And let me tell you right now, critical race theory is bigoted, it is a lie, and it is every bit as racist as the Klansmen in white sheets.
The old Marxism used economics to gain control. The new Marxism uses identity politics. And the result is something that looks nothing like America. There's no reason to believe that this new Marxism will result in anything but what the old Marxism resulted in.
Critical race theory is racism, pure and simple. And it should be rejected by every American of every race.
Someone tell me how CRT can teach racism when those same children probably watch their parents live racism every day. Kids are far more intelligent than you think.
Joining me now is Kimberly Crenshaw, co-founder and executive director of the African American Policy Forum, and the legal scholar who coined the term critical race theory. So it is your fault, madame. I tripped over the curb this morning and I went, critical race theory? Damn you! You tripped me on the car. It does everything bad. I mean, and the cicadas, y'all really need to stop with the cicadas critical race theory. That was not nice.
We can throw everything in the bag. Everything in the bag.
So I just wrote down a few of the notes of what people are calling critical race theory. Marxism, racism, bigoted. Let's start with the Marxism. That's their favorite one. They're using that every single time. And I hate to ask dumb questions, so please don't think that I'm dumb. Is critical race theory Marxism?
Look, you know what? Here's the thing, Joy. Critical race theory is not so much a thing. It's a way of looking at a thing. It's a way of looking at race. It's a way of looking at why, after so many decades, centuries, actually, since the emancipation, we have patterns of inequality that are enduring. They are stubborn. And the point of critical race theory originally was to think and talk about how law contributed to the subordinate status of African Americans, of indigenous people, and of an entire group of people who were coming to our shores from Asia. And the point was, quite frankly, to understand the problem in order to intervene in it, to understand why the greatest hopes for our republic were not being realized, even though these hopes were encoded in law. So critical race theory just inherits the beliefs and the hopes of Frederick Douglass, of Martin Luther King, who basically want the law to do for the freed people what the law did for enslavers. And we picked that up in the 70s and 80s after the civil rights movement to say, okay, so now we've had this big civil rights movement. We have all these laws in the books, but things really aren't looking as different as they should if we are really the society that we say we are. So we put about the task of understanding how law wasn't just the neutral referee. Law wasn't always on our side. In fact, law was less on our side than for on our side. And we wanted to tell these stories in order to do better with the promises that are embedded in the Constitution. That's what's in critical race theory.
So is critical race theory, is there a K through 12 curriculum that right now is being taught? I'm sorry, I know it's a dumb question, but is there a K through 12 curriculum on critical race theory that's being taught in schools around this country?
Well, look, Joy, if it was news to most Americans that critical race theory was in K through 12, it was news to me too. I'm one of the co-authors of one of the few books on critical race theory. I think I would know if we were being taught in K through 12. I mean, basically, critical race theory, classic critical race theory is a law school course. And it's really, not taught as widely as I would hope it would. Yeah. But here's the deal. This is not about whether anything called critical race theory is in K through 12. What they're calling critical race theory doesn't exist anyway. It is a backlash effort to reverse the racial reckoning unlike any we've seen in our lifetime. And as you pointed out at the beginning, they can't say, we're for racism. They can't say Derek Chauvin should have killed George Floyd with his hand in his pocket, looking like he was completely without a care in the world. They couldn't say that. So they looked around and found a strange sounding theory that they could put all of the grievances and resentments in and mobilize people around this boogeyman. And if our side can't really understand what's going on, it's going to work. It's worked in the past. It worked to end Reconstruction, and it can work to end this reckoning too.
And a gentleman named Christopher Rufo, who's very vigorously requested to be on the show. We're gonna take him up on it and let him come on this week and invite him on. He literally said, we've successfully frozen their brand, critical race theory, into the public conversation and are steadily driving up negative perceptions. We will eventually turn it toxic as we put all the various cultural insanities under that brand category. To wit, Fox News has mentioned critical race theory nearly 1,300 times in the past 3.5 months. And we've now discovered that a lot of these parents that are showing up at school boards, inveighing against their children being taught that they're, racist, turns out they are actually Republican activists, not just regular old parents.
Big surprise there, right?
Yeah, it is not surprising at all. So I guess my last question to you would be, what do you worry is sort of the purpose of what they're trying to do? Because this is political. It is about getting out the white voters in 2022. Is there a bigger risk to naming critical race theory as some sort of Marxist plot?
Well, of course. I mean, the biggest risk is that this tried and true framing of anti-racism as racist against white people is going to win again. It won at the end of the Civil War when civil rights were framed as reverse discrimination against white people. It won after Brown versus Board of Education when integration was framed as damaging white children. And it could win now if people don't wake up and have a sense of what's at stake. So yeah, you're going to hear all these stories, cherry-pick stories. Turns out a lot of them were not verifiable that the other side is putting out there. You're not going to hear, and you should, what is happening with these bans. You're not going to hear that an essay by Ta-Nehisi Coates was the reason why a school teacher was fired. You're not going to hear about the affinity groups in colleges and universities and the programs, the educational programs that are being canceled. So we need to see materially what this is doing in order to weigh into this. If anyone was mobilized by last year, if anyone is concerned about what they saw on January 6th, then you are on our side with this and you need to get involved.
The only truth in this matter is that there is one human race. Among us, some are so sadistically evil that they look down upon others because they have darker skin. The organs within us are not different from one another. We all are bipedal humanoids, with the rare exception of those of us who may be born with defects. It has always amazed me how easy it is for people to tell us to get over it when we talk about slavery and racism, but we can openly talk about how terrible the Holocaust was. They and their race-baiting politicians want to teach their children to ignore the parts of American history that adversely impact those who you call African Americans. Still, they allow everything else to be taught. We can learn about America's wars, but they do not want their children to learn about Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma, when they dropped bombs and set the city on fire while brutally killing the darker-skinned residents. Let's examine why they do not want their children to learn the truth about their evil, sadistic, and racist family history. I want to start with the racist's most potent weapon, religion. In particular, Christianity. Now, I know there's probably going to be gasps and a lot of what going on right now, but before you conclude your thoughts, let me explain why I made this statement. For this video, I will stick only to its racist aspects. I want to show you how the racists have taken religion and confused the entire world with it, yet many of these people say they only want facts to be taught in schools. How can you demand facts in schools when you allow lies in church? The Bible clearly describes Jesus Christ's appearance. Yet my entire life was filled with a narrative that defied logic. In Revelation 1, chapters 12 through 18, it states, "Then I turned to see the voice that was speaking to me, and on turning I saw 7 golden lampstands, and in the midst of the lampstands, one like a son of man, clothed in a long robe and with a golden sash around his chest. The hairs of his head were white, like white wool, like snow. His eyes were like a flame of fire. His feet were like burnished bronze. Refined in a furnace. Now, this can be interpreted in many ways. There is a lot of controversy surrounding the Bible and what part of the world the biblical people were in when this was written. For those still in denial, hair of white wool and feet were like burnished bronze does not describe any European descendants. Yet this is what the most common image of Jesus looks like in America. Some people ask why it matters, but for Christians everywhere, one of the commandments is, "Thou shalt not bear false witness." This is why it should matter. The Archbishop of Canterbury once said, Jesus should not be depicted as white. When asked whether Jesus' characterization needs to be examined, Reverend Justin Welby said, yes, of course it does. This sense that God is white. You go into churches worldwide and don't see a white Jesus. Pointing out that the color customization of Jesus is already an established practice, Reverend Justin Welby said, you go into their churches and you don't see a white Jesus, you see a black Jesus, Chinese Jesus, or a Middle Eastern Jesus, which the Reverend thought was the most accurate. The confusion is that this is interpreted in so many ways. Even if it was universally accepted that Jesus is a descendant of the tribe of Judah, look at this chart that has been circulating the internet for quite some time. I don't know who originally made this and several others like it, or even if this is true, but let's go with this article that stated Jesus descended from the tribe of Judah. The chart shows people from the tribe of Judah eventually became the African American people. Again, I don't have any direct evidence to support this chart as 100% accurate, so believe what you want. The fact is, the description in the Bible that the racists believe in clearly shows that Jesus was not Caucasian. Let's look at what this rabbi has to say. Now then, let's look at what these politicians and their racist followers are trying to hide from history.
This picture was taken in Pennsylvania in 1963. This kid that looks about middle school age is in a violent rage about something. So what is he so mad about? A black family was moving into his neighborhood, which had previously been an all-white neighborhood. Now obviously this child was not born with a violent reaction to black people moving into his neighborhood. So my question is, what was this child taught between birth and middle school that caused him to have this violent reaction? This picture is from a postcard of a lynching in the 1930s. It depicts a child attending a local lynching. And as you can see, this child is not crying or scared. She's actually smiling. So again, what could this child have possibly been taught that would cause this kind of reaction to such a horrific situation? In modern times, it's really hard to understand how people just went to lynchings as entertainment. But what if you were taught certain people deserved? If there was going to be a public execution held tomorrow at your local stadium, and the person being put to death was like the leader of the KKK or somebody trafficking children, how many people would attend that public execution just out of the belief that that person deserves it because they're a terrible person? Would you go? Would your friends go? Would your family go? Would you pay to see an evil dictator be publicly executed? The demonization and dehumanization of black people is what caused some white people to believe this was okay.
This is what defines CRT and what should be taught in schools, so we are all aware of the history, complete history, of this country. The biggest issue is that all of these incidents were ignored, mainly because they were committed against people of a darker complexion and because they don't want anyone finding out how sadistic and horrible their ancestors were. Let's look at the recent shooting in Uvalde. Some of your politicians are blaming this on CRT and what they perceive to be wokeness, which apparently is a word that a lot of politicians just learned on their word-a-day calendar. Their perception of wokeness is completely wrong. During an appearance on the Republicans' favorite domestic terrorist network, Fox, he blatantly blamed CRT and wokeness during this segment.
We stopped teaching values in so many of our schools. Now we're teaching wokeness. We're indoctrinating our children with things like CRT, telling some children they're not equal to others and they're the cause of other people's problems.
But these shootings, Senator,
there's
were
a
going
sickness
on long before CRT and wokeness, right?
Well, yeah, I think CRT's been going on under the radar for quite some time as well. Wokeness has been. Liberal indoctrination has been. This is a much larger issue than what a simple new gun law is going to. It's not going to solve it. It's not going to solve it.
So you see, even after Neil Cavuto pushed back and told the viewers that shootings had been around long before CRT, the racism in Ron Johnson would not allow it to stop there. He came up with an absolutely ridiculous and false justification. So these lies they keep telling about CRT have gotten the general public angry and all riled up. It's okay for us to talk about the Holocaust. Still, you want to suppress all knowledge of the horrible things done to the indigenous darker-skinned people you spent generations hating and attacking. It's okay for us to reference what happened to the Japanese in World War II. Still, America gave them billions to rebuild. So, Japan gets reparations, but America has continued to ignore the plea to pay reparations to the descendants of those it terrorized for centuries. We can reference all the wars, massacres, and destruction that happened to other ethnic groups and feel total sympathy for them. But when it comes to the indigenous and darker-skinned people, they are told to get over it. Let's be clear. As Angela Onwuachi-Willig has stated, race is not biological. It is a social construct. There is no gene or cluster of genes common to all blacks or all whites. Were race real in the genetic sense, racial classifications for individuals would remain constant across boundaries. Yet, a person who could be categorized as black in the United States might be considered white in Brazil or colored in South Africa. Do you need current evidence of this worldwide race label being used as a political game to erase dark-skinned and indigenous people? Nikita Josephine Paris, born 10th of March 1994, is an English professional footballer who plays as a forward for the Super League club Arsenal and the England national team. The country classifies her as white despite the fact she is clearly not. Let's take it even further. Throughout history, white European colonizers explored and conquered many countries where the indigenous population was dark-skinned. After conquering these places, many of these nations carried out a practice known as breeding out or whiting out the indigenous populations. If you are not familiar with these terms, here's the definition. To eliminate a characteristic in the course of controlled breeding. I suggest you do some research, but one of the countries is Australia. Since many of you are in denial and do not believe that art imitates life, pay attention to this newspaper clipping from Australia circa 1934. Then there is this issue in Brazil. And here are some more examples of this type of racism in Argentina. Most people here and abroad don't even realize that these leaders have painted a massive picture of division. They have done such a great job that you are continuing their war on unity for them, and you don't even realize it. You tell me, is that intelligent?
And it's worthy to be preserved. Our own heritage and our own people are worthy of preservation.
CRT is a decades-old academic idea centering the role of racism in cultural and political life. But in the current debate, its meaning is ill-defined.
This critical race theory urges intolerance of all human beings that have been created in the image of God.
I do not agree with teaching children how to feel about things. That is called indoctrination.
I'll be damned if I will allow a Marxist revolution to take place in this country, and we need to reject our children even being taught it. I'll be damned if I will allow a Marxist revolution to take place in this country, and we need to reject our children even being taught it.
Passion and anger at today's Collier County School Board meeting. Dozens turned out to oppose some of the instructional reading material approved by the school board in April, saying it teaches tenets of critical race theory and indoctrinates students with leftist ideology.
Politics cannot be in these schools unless it's a political class.
CRT focuses mainly on teaching cultural differences instead of commonalities.
Keith Flaw is the founding director of the Florida Citizens Alliance, a conservative group that crusades against curricula it deems insufficiently patriotic or excessively progressive. What did you see in those two books that you looked at? What did you object to?
Critical race theory. What critical race theory boils down to is teaching kids to hate their friends, teaching them to focus on race rather than focus on character.
So let's look at some of these examples from the K through 5 books that you were objecting to the other day.
What I did was go through the teacher's manuals that are used to teach these books. And what you find is that it builds the foundation for critical race theory, not on the 3 words of critical race theory, but it builds the foundation on culturally responsive training, equity versus equality, social justice. So those are all innocuous terms in many people's minds, but when you look at how the left is now using those to drive the whole perspective of critical race theory.
What is the sentence in here?
I'm not sure there is one.
There isn't.
The terms, see, that's where most
No, I don't even mean the terms. I mean the concepts. What in the book conceptually do you object to that teachers will read this off?
Culturally responsive training is a whole notion in the book. Equity versus equality is a whole notion.
But that's in the book that the kids will read.
No, that's in the book the teachers are using as a guide to teach the kids.
Do you have the section where it says something about equity over equality? Is equity mentioned in the teacher's guide?
I don't recall. Culturally responsive training is clearly identified.
What is culturally responsive training? What does that mean?
Culturally responsive training is a fancy term for multiculturalism, dividing people by ethnicity.
Where is this from?
This is from the homework our team did.
So that's your language, not the language of the textbook.
It's language we found in the literature. I don't know what you're looking for, Mike.
I don't see anything in here that says that they're teaching critical race theory.
This is all very subtle. We've said that from the beginning. Critical race theory is a very subtle ideology that permeates. This is identity-based racism, Marxism. If it looks like a duck, talks like a duck, and walks like a duck, it's a duck.
The teacher's responsibility is only to teach them what's supposed to be taught in school, not their opinion.
I love the poorly educated.
Let's dig a little. Marxism is a social, political, and economic theory originated by Karl Marx that focuses on the struggle between capitalists and the working class. Marx wrote that the power relationships between capitalists and workers were inherently exploitative and would inevitably create class conflict. Karl Heinrich Marx was a German philosopher, a critic of political economy, economist, historian, sociologist, political theorist, journalist, and socialist revolutionary. His best-known titles are the 1848 pamphlet, The Communist Manifesto, and the 3-volume Das Kapital. Friedrich Engels, sometimes anglicized as Frederick Engels, was a German philosopher, a critic of political economy, historian, political theorist, and revolutionary socialist. So, this means a Marxist supports the political and economic theories of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. Let's dig a little deeper. What is Marxism versus communism? Communism is the realization of a stateless society where all are equal. On the other hand, Marxism is the framework by which such a state is developed. While Marxism is a political ideology based on Karl Marx's ideas, communism can be called a political system based on Marxist ideology. The fact that these people use the term Marxist to describe CRT shows how racist and hateful these people are. They will tell you it is Marxist or communist, pretending they completely understand what it is, when in reality, a lot of them are just regurgitating political talking points used by their favorite politician. So their philosophy is that when the indigenous and dark-skinned people want their terror-filled history in this country to be taught, they are called Marxists. However, when it comes to teaching any part of history in which Caucasian or white people were oppressed, it is always acceptable. Throughout history, what their ancestors did and continue to do to indigenous and dark-skinned people and their descendants should never be forgotten. All human history should be taught without exception, and I'm not surprised by this excessive amount of racial resistance. Only by learning the horrors of the past will we be able to move beyond it and learn from those mistakes. The last thing I want to discuss is the other side of this issue. To my indigenous and dark-skinned people, I have made plenty of videos in which I am practically pleading with you to stop all this negativity towards one another. You have the spending power in this country that can shift entire city or state economies. In 2020, African American economic clout energized the U.S. consumer market as never before. The buying power of African Americans rose to $1.6 trillion, or 9% of the nation's total buying power. That was 2020. That would have placed our communities at 11th in the highest GDP ranking. The African American population has historically held a powerful position in the retail marketplace, as they have been known to drive trends across food, beauty, media, and more. Their influence will continue to grow as their buying power does, which is projected to reach $1.8 trillion by 2024. That trend will place our communities at 14th in that ranking if this trend continues.
It's time now for our Equity and Opportunity series, and Frank Holland joins us this morning with a closer look at the growth in black spending power. Frank.
Hey, good morning to you, Andrew. Black spending power reached a record $1.6 trillion in 2021. The ability to buy, save, and invest more than doubling since 2000. That growth exceeding the full U.S. economy, but actually lagging other ethnic groups, Latinos with a 288% increase, Asians with a 388% increase in spending power. However, other groups, they've also seen an increase in their net worth. Black Americans instead have seen their wealth actually fall by 14%. And with the S&P gaining 27% last year, the value of U.S. homes increasing by 31% last year. Many black leaders are asking the black community to really rethink how it spends.
If we refocus our energy on building our communities and empowering our people, the issues we constantly fall prey to will diminish significantly.
Save money to purchase the most important asset you'll probably ever own, and that's your home.
I would love to see us spend more money in the stock market. Instead of buying the hottest new thing, buy the stock of the hottest new thing. And that's something that you can also pass down generation to generation.
These politicians keep doing what they do because they do not believe you will ever be able to work together long enough to bring about any changes in your own communities. From how our people treat each other, how our men address our women in music and movies, to how some of our women treat our men. We need to find a way to be unified.
Home ownership is typically the biggest wealth builder in the black community. That's actually fallen more than 3% since 2000. And annually, black families accumulate $300 billion less in wealth than white families, and they save $75 billion less. The racial wealth gap now at more than $11 trillion.
I've heard many in our community say that the other ethnicities only look out for themselves. What do you expect them to do? I don't fault them for that. They should not be blamed because our communities failed to do the same thing. If we were looking out for each other, many of our issues would disappear. I want to touch on another issue that has been great material for comedians. It was said that the government would care about gun control when darker-skinned people began buying more guns, and Ronald Reagan seemed to agree back in 1967. Let's watch.
Careful note of the racist California legislature, which is now considering legislation aimed at keeping the black people disarmed and powerless. At the very same time, racist police agencies throughout the country are intensifying the terror, brutality, murder, and repression of black people.
Wait a minute. Now, wait a minute. Am I under arrest? Am I under arrest? You place him under arrest. Go ahead, bro. If I'm under arrest, I'll come. If I'm not, don't put your hands on me. Is this the way the racist government works? Don't let a man exercise his constitutional rights?
And there is absolutely no reason why out on the street today a civilian should be carrying a loaded weapon.
You don't know the constitutional right?
Sure we do. We're well aware of the constitutional right.
You have no right to take my gun away from me. I would like to have my gun back.
Why do you believe the legislature is racist?
Don't you know? You're a part of it, and you're obviously, it's a white system.
You say to read your pamphlet. This is the pamphlet that the man presented me with. It's called A Statement of the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense on the Mulford Act, now pending before the California legislature. The Mulford Act would control the use of arms, especially loaded weapons, and would prohibit them. These men seem to have loaded weapons with them. The statement seems to indicate that these people feel that the black people have been enslaved throughout most of their lives, that the white society is responsible for this, and then they go on to say the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense believes that the time has come for black people to arm themselves against this terror, the terror of the white people presumably, before it is too late, and the pending Mulford Act brings the hour of doom one step nearer.
They put trumped-up charges of conspiracy and felonies on everyone who went in to exercise a constitutional right.
They violated the law by entering the chambers while the assembly was in session.
You can't touch guns, the Second Amendment. Well, the Second Amendment relates and speaks of a well-regulated militia. It doesn't talk about a ragtail tin soldier army of cannon collectors who are, most of them, disturbed people anyway.
Only those who are intellectually deficient or have breathtaking levels of denial could believe anything these politicians say about CRT. America, your racism is at the very core of your existence, and to think otherwise reflects the lengths your political parties will go to hide the country's racist history. And that would be Republicans and Democrats. The facts are, many of these families who are feigning anger and outrage and going to these great lengths to falsely state that CRT promotes racism are the ones who are trying to hide their own family's participation in much of the racist history of this country.
You can't fix stupid.
Check out this video up here. That'll give you kind of a breakdown of what happens when these young children from decades ago saw these people being hung, and then they grew up in the same neighborhoods. Do you think that type of thinking left the household, or do you think they took it with them to their own households?
When they attack black people after they've been murdered, when they did absolutely nothing wrong, you're pushing us to the limit. And what do I mean by that? You're asking us to talk about history, the history of the South. This is in Georgia. What happened in Georgia? There were savages in Georgia. It was the ancestors of the white right-wingers. They were absolute savages. They murdered people, they lynched people, they raped people, they enslaved people. They took babies from their mothers and sold them as property. You want to talk about savages? Your ancestors were the biggest savages the world has ever seen. So don't you dare call a black man a savage after you murdered him. Don't you dare do that. I'm so sick of African Americans being called violent when the world's worst violence was done to them, not by them, to them, not by them. For God's sake, you want to do racist stereotypes? If it fit anywhere, and it doesn't, but if it fit anywhere, it would certainly fit white right-wingers in the South, who has hundreds of years of history of being savages. Savages. They snatched babies, and they sold them as property, and they raped their mothers. Savages. That's what they were. You want to talk about stereotypes? Screw all of you who still defend that Confederacy. That monstrosity. Anyone who defends that is a barbaric savage.
Here's the fact. Babies are not born racist. That behavior is learned from their environment, home, school, and eventually even work. As a result of the hatred you have taught your children, we've had to teach our children countermeasures. As a result of those countermeasures, we have generations of people who hate each other, and the racist parents are trying hard to cover up why the hate exists by blaming something they don't even understand. If you spent more time fighting for your children to learn true history instead of fighting to erase it, they would be well-rounded citizens and have much more to offer the world. It's no wonder some children cut off their families when they have a chance to visit the rest of the world outside the racist umbrella covering their homes. You are so content with things the way they are because they do not impact you the way they affect the indigenous and darker-skinned people. I previously created a video called How Racism is Taught that expands on various causes for this deep-rooted race hate ripping this country apart. You can click on that link to watch the video. And the video is also listed below in all of my recommendations. Most of you do not have an attention span long enough to make it to this part of the video, so the link appeared earlier and is also at the end and also in the comments list. If you've made it this far, please watch the recommended videos that popped up throughout this one, and please leave a comment simply saying, I made it. A message to my people of color and all our communities. It is a shame that the racists will sit and watch hours of hateful propaganda about us, but I can't get many of you to watch a video about the evil deeds done to us that runs longer than 20 minutes. If you cannot dedicate yourself to watching the length of this video to educate yourselves on things that have been and are continuing to happen to us, then you can't complain when so many of us remain clueless and don't know what to do. This has been your wake-up call.